Welcome to Pop Screen, a new podcast from the Geek Show Podcast Network. We deal with the good, the bad, and the inexplicable of movies starring, about, or directed by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broader range of musical and cinematic genres, from country to hip-hop, documentaries to sci-fi. I'm Graham Williamson, film critic for The Geek Show and Horrified, and this week I've been joined by Ewan Gleadow.
You can find me on Northern Lights, Geek Show obviously, and Cult Following.
For a while, the 90s were looking a lot like the 60s in Britain. We had a new Labour government, a plausible shot at the World Cup, and our pop music was making waves all over the world. And just as we were all wondering which of our achingly credible indie bands would be the first to conquer America like the Beatles did, they were leapfrogged by the campiest, silliest item on the menu, the Spice Girls. After that, it only remains to make the tie-in movie Spice World, which brings us here today. As they say on Arrakis, the spice must flow. Ewan, here's a more complicated question than it might appear. What is the Spice Girls' legacy?
I think their legacy is that they were a good pop band. They ushered in a new wave of music in Britain. Because, you had Britpop for that 5-year period before the Spice Girls came in. And then all of a sudden it's flashy clothing. It's back to really 5-piece groups like the Spice Girls, and then Coldplay came along and you had Radiohead. They're obviously very different to the Spice Girls, but that pop attitude came back, which was, regardless of what you think of their music and the movie, it's their legacy can definitely be defined as they sort of brought back a genre that hadn't been seen in decades.
Yeah, because I think you can't really understand the Spice Girls in my book without understanding why Britpop happened. And I think an underappreciated reason why Britpop happened is that late 80s mainstream pop was so bad.
Yeah, definitely.
It is not a normal state of affairs for the great British record buying public to actually want to listen to northern guitar bands on independent record labels, but Mel and Kim forced us into it.
Yeah.
So I think part of the implicit promise of the Spice Girls when they first came out was, all right, here's an old-fashioned pop band who were bright enough and brash enough to compete with Britpop on its own turf. And the image is kind of Britpoppy too, with the Union Jack dress, the bus in this film. It's all playing with that same kind of 60s iconography.
Yeah. I think it was Britpop that sort of, I remember I think it was Select in 1993 when they had Brett Anderson from Suede on the front cover in front of the Union Jack. And then it's sort of that, although Britpop sort of died out, that image of being proud of the Union Jack for the music and the pop scene really sort of, that didn't go away for a long, long time. And the Spice Girls sort of kicked a bit of life into it.
Yeah, it's a fair point. You can well imagine that arc would have ended without them, because this film came out in 1997. By that time, Blur have released an album that is mostly influenced by Sonic Youth and Pavement. Oasis have slipped into self-parody. Pulp are 1 year out from releasing This Is Hardcore. There's not a lot of sort of cheerfully patriotic good spirits going on here.
It was sort of a sign that the party was over, and that it wasn't a fact that the Spice Girls were in the right place at the right time. I think it was inevitable that a new wave of music would come in, and they just sort of took the reins in that regard. They knew it had to be done.
Yeah, and I think they had the benefit of getting in like a year or so before it would have become necessary. I think
definitely.
If this hadn't happened, you'd have had people running around in 1998 listening to This Is Hardcore and going, "Well, what happened to pop? Where did pop go? What the hell?" Uh,
What could have been?
what could have been? Legal disclaimer: I absolutely adore This Is Hardcore, but
Possibly one of the greatest albums ever written.
yeah, tricky to sell to
Oh,
the
definitely.
yeah, which is why I think there was a lot of fevered brows in the industry that were mocked by the Spice Girls attaining
Yeah.
prominence.
I think it's quite a nice balance, though. This is
Mm.
hardcore and Spice World. It's sort of the mindset of the people on the way out compared to who was coming in.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And Spice World is kind of an odd film anyway, because it is almost as cynical as This Is Hardcore. There is
Yeah,
like
definitely.
a level to it where it is openly mocking the very idea that anyone should be interested in a Spice Girls movie in a way that feels really unwise.
It's yeah, because I mean, to talk about the movie itself, I'll ask you first. Actually, what did you actually think of the movie?
I mean, I think there are large stretches of it that are terrible. And every now and then there is a moment that makes me think, oh, right, that's what it could have been. And then there are also whole performances in it where I can't decide whether they're good or not. But I guess we'll get into that because this has a
Yeah.
a Robert Altman movie of a guest cast for some reason.
It's we'll get to that because what I was going to say was it was what you said about how it mocks the sort of feel of the times and stuff. There's one scene in it very late on in the film where Richard E. Grant is at a bar
Mm,
and he's, oh, is this the part where we ruin our working relationship? And
yeah,
that was sort of it would have been so on the nose and like a wink at the camera if it weren't just a bad film.
yeah,
it would
yeah.
have worked if there was a bit of power behind it, but
I,
it's a strange one.
I mean, it gets off on a bad foot by essentially inviting comparisons to the film that we covered on this show last week, which is A Hard Day's Night, which
Yes, yeah.
I understand fully why someone trying to make a pop cash-in movie would want to look to A Hard Day's Night, but it is a fight that this movie cannot win. I mean, for one thing, the thing that surprised me the most is that A Hard Day's Night is just like this amphetamine hit of energy. It's the most
Yeah.
energizing movie. And I have seen Bella Tarr films that were faster paced than this thing.
Pretty sure Damnation got through the first act quicker than Spice World,
Yeah.
Spice World did. It's I mean, even if you look at the poster of Spice World, that's sort of
Mm,
they're all jumping up in the air like they were on A Hard Day's Night on the poster, where they're in the
yeah.
street and they're jumping. It's I don't know if it's mockery. I do think that's just, oh, the Beatles did it and we're like the modern Beatles. We'll
Mm.
do that. So I think it's of an honest nature that they've done it. But obviously, to say, oh, we're like the Beatles is a bold claim for any band to make.
Yes, yeah. I mean, somewhere there is a parallel universe where, like, the Britpop bands weren't as resistant to making movies, where there's like an Oasis version of Help or something,
Oh,
which, yeah. But this is what we got. I think I was trying to work out why it bothered me because some of my favourite bits in A Hard Day's Night are the more cynical bits, the bits with like George Harrison mocking the fashion photographer and stuff like that.
yeah.
I think the problem is that the Beatles were undercutting something that you did not expect to be undercut. This is rock and roll stardom in its infancy with the hottest new band. You don't expect it to be mocking its own apparatus. Whereas everyone knew the Spice Girls were a manufactured band. And in fact, that was part of their selling point. It's like, oh, here
Yeah.
we've got like a bunch of stage school kids who, have been drawn together by a talent scout and have their own kind of manufactured personalities. You haven't had that in a long time. It's fun.
Yeah.
And it seems so strange to me to be mocking the artifice of something that everyone knew was artificial. It's like when you have that bizarre subplot with the film producer played by George Wendt from Cheers, who's saying, "Oh, who cares if they can act? They're the latest thing." And it's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, that was exactly what people went into the cinema thinking. So
Yeah.
what what's the
I'll
level
hold
of
my hands
satire
up.
here? Yeah.
I'll um I'll say this. I don't think their acting in this is bad. I think it's serviceable.
I
Um,
think there is a spectrum of it for me, but
yes.
yeah, yeah,
Considering such, like you said, the Altman like cast, that's
yeah.
you've got such a range of, these people shouldn't be here, but it's quite a good performance that spoofs their old work, like Roger Moore.
Hmm.
But then you've got someone like Alan Cumming who's sort of shoehorned into this plot where he's a documentary filmmaker
Hmm.
following them around, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't actually interact with any of them, and he's just sort of there in the background. And
Yeah.
it felt like a wasted opportunity. I do think a lot of the subplots in this film sort of amalgamate into just this big blob where they thought, oh, great, we've got this person into the film. He's relatively famous or she's relatively famous. We need them to do something, but we haven't got time to film with the Spice Girls, so we'll just pop them around in the background.
Yeah,
But
I completely agree with you about that subplot, and particularly with the Alan Cumming thing. I mean, no shade on Alan Cumming, but you've already got a newspaper photographer in it, and you've got a film producer in it. So,
yeah,
what does a documentary filmmaker add that can't be covered by those other two things?
and
I
it's
mean,
it's the fact
nothing.
that exactly. It's the fact that there's two such similar styles. You've got the documentary filmmaker by Alan Cumming, and then you've got the photographer by, I think it's Richard O'Brien, isn't it?
Richard O'Brien, yeah, who credit to
Oh,
him is having a lot of fun here.
he's always a lot of fun to watch on screen. I remember him in Shock Treatment. It's just he's an energy like no other.
Yeah.
But here he's having fun. I don't see why they couldn't just put those two together, those two
Mm.
roles at least. Not as in pair Alan Cummings and Richard O'Brien. That'd be quite the pairing.
Hello.
But I think if you're going to have a documentary filmmaker whose sole purpose in plot is to follow the Spice Girls, and then have a photographer working for a tabloid mockery of what I assume is the Sun
Mm.
following the Spice Girls, then why not just put them both together? Have it layered like that instead
Yeah.
of, there's too much going on and there's not enough time to deal with it.
It got to the point where I was genuinely quite excited when two plot strands paid off and tied together at the end. It's like, oh, whoa, that's a level of basic competence I wasn't expecting.
There's so much that just isn't worth it. Like none
Yeah.
of it really pays off. There's I don't remember what happened to Richard O'Brien. I'm pretty sure they were in a hospital when their friend was pregnant. They've had a baby and they're in the corridor and he pops out of nowhere and they're like,
Yeah.
"What are you doing?" And then that's it. That next scene, they're in a taxi on the way to play their concert, and it's I like I understand that we're not going to get extreme quality or consistency from a film that is basically a vehicle for a factory-made pop band.
Hmm.
But at the very least, you'd expect sort of an understanding that these subplots need to be finished because these
Yeah.
people who they got for the movie are professionals. They
Yeah.
got Richard E. Grant, they got Roger Moore. I'm pretty sure they got Claire Rushbrook as well from Secrets and Lies.
And there is a scene, isn't there, in the closing credits where they do lines from Secrets and Lies in there. This movie has Mike Lee references in.
Baby Spice does a Mike Lee reference at the end credits, and it's uh, I haven't got the words for it. It was like I just had it beamed in from a different reality. It's like, right, well, what a way to end the movie. I can imagine the 7 people on the initial release who understood that reference, because I'm not saying that, the two audiences connect that much. They don't have a lot
There's
of
not a crossover fan base, is there?
no, they don't have too many consistencies with one another. But like, I guess it's because that film came out around the time. Like it was
Yeah.
'96, wasn't it? So it was the
Yeah,
year
I
before.
guess. Yeah.
But surely there's some more relevant pictures to put in, or at least more popular stuff. You've got Richard E. Grant who was in Withnail and I.
I mean,
No, no references.
we've mentioned Richard E. Grant a few times, and this is the thing. This is the one that was making me think: is this performance good? Because I feel like I have no reference point for what Richard E. Grant is doing in this.
I really like Richard E. Grant as a performer. I
Me
think
too.
here it's that sort of have you seen him on Twitter where he'll upload these videos and he'll just be sat on his sofa and then just start laughing and he's really happy,
Yes.
and I don't know why, but his performance in Spice World reminds me of that. So I think rather than it being a bad performance, I think he's just having a lot of fun and doesn't really care as much or wants to apply himself as much to something that, isn't going to win him awards or anything like that. I think this is just sort of a release for him. It's where he can bring that manic energy that we know he can do. And he's just sort of saying, all right, this is what you're getting. You're going to get this sort of manic swinging character where it just from one end of the pendulum, it's, hard line. It seems like he hates the Spice Girls at times, so you can't have fun. And then it leaps the other way, and it's like, where have they gone? I care for them. It's so weird.
It is such a strange performance, and I think maybe you're right, because obviously Richard E. Grant is a national treasure now, and
absolutely.
Part of the reason for that is because he is capable of just goofing around and laughing at himself so much. But at the time this was made, he was doing stuff like Scorsese's The Age of Innocence. So I guess there is kind of a pent-up, goofy energy in him that he is letting out here.
I mean, if we look at something like How to Get Ahead in Advertising, that energy's, always there.
Yeah.
I think it's never faded away. But when you think about what he was doing, like you said, he did Scorsese, he did Jack and Sarah 2 years before this. He was gearing himself up to be sort of the poster boy for, Throw a BAFTA my way or something like that. And then he does the Spice World movie, and it sort of undoes a lot of the work he'd been doing to that point.
And in a strange way, he maybe needed to do that, because I can't imagine like award season habitué Richard E. Grant would be as much fun.
Yeah, I think this is a release he needed at the time from doing those sort of awards heavy movies.
I mean, in terms of people who were in major awards baits, the most incredible one that I found out about is someone who did not make the final cut of this movie, which is originally there was going to be a cameo from Gary Oldman.
Really? I didn't know that.
And I tried he couldn't do it because of his schedule. And I was trying to work out what was Gary Oldman doing at this point that prevented him from being in Spice World. It might have been Nil by Mouth.
Right, okay.
Just think about Gary Oldman going off the set of Nil by Mouth and going on to the set
I'm very
of Spice
sorry,
World.
I can't come in to shoot the scenes today. I've got to record my Spice World cameo. That's I'm very sorry, I've got to do a scene with Baby Spice. I mean, speaking of cameos, there's a lot of people that apparently I've got a very old man's music taste, but there's a lot of people I recognize. You've got Elvis Costello, Elton John, Bob Geldof's in it for a bit as well. He's got quite a lengthy cameo compared to the other two.
I was looking forward to the Elvis Costello cameo, but it's pretty nugatory.
It's pretty quick, but I read an interview he did about Spice World a couple of years after, and he explained it, and he said it was quite ironic because I think it was a year before he filmed the scene as a bartender. He'd gone teetotal.
Right.
So, but no, I think it was just nice to see. I didn't think it'd be that late into the film when you saw him. I thought it'd be a throwaway cameo like the Jonathan Ross one at the start.
I was expecting something like the Jools Holland one where it plays into him being a musician. But it is quite an odd thing to throw in very late in the film.
They held that card very close to their chest. They weren't giving up us Elvis Costello too early.
Elvis Costello.
You gotta suffer for him.
Elvis Costello in Spice World is like Tilda Swinton in Avengers Endgame. Just when you think they're all cameoed out, bang, there they come.
I think it's like the final 20 minutes it's a really big rush job, and it's sort of, all right, we've got to amalgamate all these subplots into one. We've got time for Elvis Costello, bring him in, and then just sort of wheel him out into a bar, and then it's odd. Like, you could cut that entire scene, the film would be no different. You could cut all the cameos and it'd be no different.
And it is rushed too. I mean, I don't want to judge something made in the 90s by modern special effects standards, but this had a pretty decent budget, and it has some of the worst green screen I've seen since like John Pertwee or Doctor Who. It is ghastly.
It's below par for, if you think about sort of what CGI was happening in the 90s. You had The Matrix 2 years later, you had Jurassic Park in 92. And I'm not saying Spice World's going to have the same budget as that.
Yeah.
But the technology was clearly there to do at least something more upstanding.
And it's like it's green screen, you know, it predates CGI. It's a pretty
Yeah,
basic effects technique. There's no reason why a big film from this era should look as bad as this, but
yeah.
I don't
I
know.
think saying that though, I do
Mm.
think the actual sets that they have, especially towards the end that nightclub, it does capture the sort of feeling of the late 90s.
Yeah, yeah, I am interested in this film primarily as a kind of late 90s artifact. I mean, there's a joke about Teletubbies in there, and it
See,
brought
I
back
got
to
that one.
see, there was a time when people just could not handle Teletubbies, and they thought it was the strangest thing they'd ever seen. So yeah, that brought it all back. Um,
I think it's inevitably there are going to be cameos and jokes in this film that sort of either don't age well because the subject's just been forgotten about, or
mm.
just because it doesn't really make sense by today's standards. And I think Spice World does have some of those, but I don't think it has enough where it's all right. These are getting a bit inconsistent. But
It
you know, you've
doesn't
got
quite
Meatloaf as a
have
bus driver.
that. Yeah, it maybe it
It's
needed a bit more of that kind of Proustian quality, a bit more of that. Oh, I remember that feel.
yeah, because you know you've got they throw in a Poirot reference
Mm.
with Hugh Laurie, and I thought, yeah, okay. I mean, Poirot's a timeless character, nobody's ever going to forget him. That's fair enough. But then, like you said, there's a Teletubbies one, so it's sort of balancing it out in all these weird ways.
I think one of the things that I found frustrating about it is that there isn't a consistent level of reality. And I'm not saying that in a sort of film crit way. I actually
Yeah,
think if this existed at a complete cartoon level all the way through, it would be tons better. But
yeah,
you do keep cutting back from scenes like the one which introduces what's his name? The guy who plays Dame Edna Everage, Barry Humphries, the
yes.
one that
Oh, yeah.
the
Like,
one that introduces him is active parody. It exists on no level of reality. You know, it's a joke about filmic conventions. And then
yeah,
it gets back to after that, it becomes a comedy that has fantasy sequences. And you think, well, why do you need fantasy sequences? It started raining inside someone's office. You know, what
it's
limits of reality do you need to transgress?
and that's the thing. I think it's more frustrating than anything else because the scene with Barry Humphries and the bit with Richard E. Grant at the bar, those are signs of strong mockery of a genre that has been oversaturated by cliche. The problem Spice World has is that the scenes around those brief moments
Mm.
fall into the actual cliches they're trying to criticize.
Yeah,
Have
yeah.
such a very simple narrative structure, and then
Mm.
maybe two or three scenes where it's like brief criticism of the genre that they're in, and then it's back to it. It's back to the 9 to 5 of following the Spice Girls around London.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's very true, and I think the girls themselves become better actors when they're in a more over-the-top scene. I have a
Yes,
weird fondness for the scene where they imagine themselves in the future as a load of inexplicably northern mums. I think that there's just a joy in performance there that I wanted more of.
yeah, I think there are definite scenes where it's sort of that energy comes to life and they bring it out and they display it quite well. And then there's scenes that are sort of they're put together in a way that should utilize that energy, but they just can't for whatever reason. Like the bit with the boat where the two
Mm.
kids who've won a meeting with the Spice Girls go onto the bus and they're like, "Oh, we're going to escape and steal a boat," and it's got that manic energy to it, but the people involved just can't bring themselves to finish it off.
Yeah. And I think also it's partly a directing problem because, as I said before, that for something that is aiming to be absolute manic, fourth wall breaking farce, directorially, you're not talking about hell's a pop in here. It's quite leaden. And it's strange because Bob Spears, the director, has directed a lot of the all-time great television sitcoms. He directed episodes of Fawlty Towers, Absolutely Fabulous. You think he should understand this kind of energy, but it's not there.
I think, I mean, Bob Spears, he clearly has a background in comedy. He knows what he's doing. Do you think then it's just sort of that step up from television to filmmaking? I'm not saying
Yeah,
one is better than the other, but it's sort of a bigger scale.
but it's a different skill set, isn't it? Particularly
Yeah,
when you're not looking at television as it is now, where it breaks its own back to be considered cinematic. You're looking at television like Faulty Towers, which is essentially, and I say this loving Faulty Towers, but it's essentially filmed theatre.
yeah.
You've got a bunch of actors, they're on a stage set. There's no naturalism to it, but that doesn't matter. And it's just about capturing that energy of a performance. Whereas when you talk about something that has, you know, bus driving stunts and fantasy sequences, you have to create that energy through the actual filmmaking, which maybe that just isn't his skill set. I don't know.
I'd agree with you on that one. I don't think it's his skill set to sort of pair the two. But even then, he doesn't quite capture the energy of the Spice Girls consistently enough to make it work. You know, it was
Mm.
like you just mentioned there. I forgot all about that bus chase scene with Posh Spice behind the wheel of the bus, and then the other four are on
Yes.
the top of the bus, and it's so bizarre. And I think they're trying to get away with, oh, it's so zany and weird that it works, but
Mm.
it's just. I think it's one of those examples where it's better on paper than it is in practice.
Yeah, yeah, completely. I mean, in terms of like flashes of what it could have been, there are moments, particularly after Richard E. Grant has that big screaming round with them and walks off. There are moments where it's just them interacting together that has a sort of the chemistry between them works, and it's not any great shakes, but it feels like the performance is more organic than it is for the rest of it. A lot of the rest of it is basically, hello, I am X Spice, here is my X characteristic, which I will now talk about for a bit.
That's the thing. It was even that I felt like that was in part sort of a knock at not just how filmmaking cliches sort of shoehorn people into stereotypes, but also the wider view that the Spice Girls were these one note people, where they're on the bus and the bus is segmented into fifths, and
Yeah,
their seating arrangements are set to their personality. So Sporty Spice has a bicycle machine. It's like the dressing room for Posh Spice is sort of like very,
this
modern.
fabulous
It's
Versace
it's
closet. Yeah,
and it's like I get the criticism and I understand what they're going for, but it doesn't work if you are then doing that exact thing that
exactly.
you're criticizing, and
Yeah.
it is frustrating because I see the intention, and the intention is genuinely quite wholehearted and it's good, and I don't think they set off to do this film as a cash in. I think they signed on to do this film because they actually wanted to.
Mm, mm. I
But
think that
it's
the one moment where it breaks through that is there is this weird as shit running joke, which I wish there'd been more stuff like this, where Jerry Halliwell has a great interest in marine life, and
oh yeah.
which is so far out of left field that it actually kind of tickled me by that point.
There was just I think it was because I guarantee you they had holes in the script and they were like, we need to fill this. Jerry, what have you been looking at this week? Oh, I've been reading a book on marine biology. Brilliant. Give us a few facts of that. We'll pop it in the script. You're a marine biologist. And that was it. And it does work. It's that energy again where that randomness does
Mm,
work there. But I don't think you can have a full feature length film relying solely on random interactions that might be funny. A
mm.
lot of it, again, it sounds good on paper. You know, the Spice Girls steal two children and then a boat, and Richard E. Grant chases after them in a purple zoot suit. It sounds great and it sounds really funny, but in practice, the way it's shot and the way it's framed, it just isn't up to scratch. And I think it's because the Bob Spears' direction isn't up to the task of sort of capturing that magic that the Spice Girls do bring. Like the Spice Girls aren't a bad pop group. I mean, it's not my cup of tea, but the actual album that ties in with the movie is relatively solid. They released some good singles that are, still relatively popular today.
I had
Um,
forgotten what a fearsome earworm, Who Do You Think You Are is. I mean,
oh,
I watched this film 2 days ago and it's still stuck in my head.
who do you think you are? And then it was Wannabe as well. I remember that on Chicken Run from
Oh,
years gone
yeah,
by.
yeah.
It was just there's a weird karaoke bit with. I think Chicken Run was like around the time the Spice Girls were splitting up too. 2003.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it'll have been close to that, because Wallace
Yeah,
and Gromit in the Curse of the Were-Rabbit was 2005. I remember that
yeah.
because I've got it on the front of my Letterboxd page, and it's just like taunting me about how old I am every time I log in.
Oh man, I was 5 when that film came out.
Oh,
The
wow.
glory days.
Yeah, all downhill from there.
Exactly. I had to watch the Spice World movie. Of course, it's downhill. But it was. I mean, we talked about the cameos and we talked about. I mean, we left out Bob Hoskins' weird thing where Jerry Halliwell transforms into Bob Hoskins in a
Actually,
phone booth.
quite funny, I thought.
It
Well,
was. I thought
that
it was really
is
good
that is
when he
another
did the
joke
girl
that
power.
works. Yeah,
That was solid.
yeah.
They're just. I think that works because Spears doesn't have to do anything with the camera. He doesn't have to move it or frame it any differently. He just needs the phone box on the right and the road on the left. So Bob Hoskins walk into the center, do the
Mm.
Spice Girls piece, and then walk off. And that's really quick. I think where Spears' direction falls to pieces, though, is that it's all well and good framing a sitcom like Fawlty Towers, where the camera is on a set and just on a track going from left to right. It doesn't have to do much apart from the odd close up. He's working 360 degrees in Spice World.
Mm.
So he's got this new plane. He doesn't realize that he can move the camera sort of around, and he tries to do it on the bus a few times when he's showing what the Spice Girls are doing and why they're themed like that, and it just doesn't work. And I think it's because he's going for all these static angles where it's very not minimalist but simplistic,
Mm.
where it's sort of zoom, shot, cut shot, and that's it. There's no I don't know. There's a couple Dutch angles in the club, and I thought that was a bit weird.
Yeah.
Just a tilted angle to show that there's a heavily pregnant woman on the balcony in a club, and it was right.
Okay.
But yeah,
Yeah.
he's really lacking something in the direction department. And I don't think it's because, like you said, he's a bad director for television. I think it's because he doesn't know what to do with these
Yeah.
subjects.
I mean, Spice World exists at the intersection of a few genres. Obviously, it's a comedy. It also has a kind of action and a chase element.
Yeah.
It's also a musical, of course, and that
Yes. Yeah.
demands a great amount of visual style. So it's quite cruelly exposing someone who's come from this TV sitcom world to
Yeah.
expect him to suddenly make, this combination of A Hard Day's Night and The Fast and the Furious. I think that's a bit much.
It's such a great leap for him to make. It's
Mm.
like I can't think of anyone who would have fared any better in the directing department for this. I
Yeah.
don't know.
And it's maybe, maybe it was always doomed to fail because one of the things about 90s culture is that it is sometimes painfully ironic. And obviously, there were some great directors in Britain at the time this was made, but someone like Danny Boyle isn't going to risk doing
No,
something
of
as
course not.
uncool as making a Spice Girls movie. So,
He was still riding the high of Trainspot, and he couldn't go. He
mm,
would have went the complete other way thematically. He's gone from dingy Edinburgh, grey and gloomy, very
yeah,
hard hitting stuff to we're going to flaunt around London with the Spice Girls. It's such a jolt to
yeah,
make.
yeah. I think everyone who was good back then had a career that was in some way founded on not being the kind of guy who makes
Yeah.
movies like this. Of course,
I
some of
think
them.
Mike Lee could have done it. I mean, the
Oh
big fans
yeah,
of Secrets and Lies, of course.
he's got the cast for it. He's got secret Mike Lee fans in.
Oh, God.
That's a good question. How different would this movie be if it was based up from like painstaking improvisations with the Spice Girls and say Timothy Spall? How different would
Oh,
that be?
well, I mean, honestly, if you didn't have Meatloaf in there, Timothy Spall probably could have done the bus driver role.
Yeah,
I can see that
completely.
because that's a comfortable role for him to take. I
Mm,
think whoever takes that role is going to, pay off relatively well. There's two lines that Meatloaf has the relative setups to decent lines later on with Richard E. Grant, and then apart from that, he doesn't have to do anything. So I think Spall could have done that. I think
yeah.
if you're thinking about big actors at the time, maybe Jim Broadbent could have done that. I don't know though. That seems his sort of style is a little slower than what what Meatloaf can bring to the table.
He
But
doesn't have the high octane energy of Meatloaf.
Meatloaf's honestly a really good draw for this film.
Mm.
It's so left of field that it works. Because when I think Meatloaf, I don't instantly think, oh yeah, like the Spice Girls. So
Yes.
it's the fact that they've got again like that bit of ballast where it's sort of completely out of the blue, like Elvis Costello being in there with his sort of alternate rock and then
And,
appearing in a pop film.
and Meatloaf is, of course, only a couple of years out from doing Fight Club here, which is a legitimately great performance.
I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I mean, that's the life of a jobbing actor, isn't it? One day you're in a David Fincher movie, and the next you're a Spice Girls bus driver.
It's, it's not quite the career trajectory I'd want, but I'll take it if it's going. I mean, he just disappears partway through the movie. They steal his bus, and then that's it for him.
Yeah.
I assume they just abandon him, and he's left to walk the streets of London for good. That's it. That's he doesn't know what to do without his Union Jack bus. And
Well, that would have been the sequel. Meatloaf would have sought his revenge on the Spice Girls. Meatloaf's bit also sets up that very weird UFO bit in the middle as well, which is what?
I really didn't like that bit. I'd blocked all memory of it out of my mind. I think again, it's one of those sort of fantasy elements that you said about where they're trying to combine that sort of zany fun with the pop scene of
Hey.
they're trying to combine that zany comedy with the actual pop atmosphere of the time. And their thought is, oh, we'll do that bit in Life of Brian where Brian gets a new UFO. And it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But again, it's sort of seeing what sticks and very little of it does.
It's again that slightly anal problem I'm having where this is something that will like do a Poirot parody and cordon off the fact that this is a parody. It is not happening with a big swirly effect in and out. And then in the next scene, they'll just meet aliens and it'll be brushed under the carpet by next scene. And you think, what's the point of having fantasy sequences if you live in a totally elastic universe? I don't understand.
I suppose it's sort of, I mean, especially if you think Hugh Laurie was doing it, in his contract, it'll have said, look, I'll be in this movie just as long as you make it very, very clear that this is not the real world. I'll do it if it's fantasy. I'll do it if it's fake.
Yes.
I mean, it's such an odd scene as well. It's, I mean, I've watched a little bit of Poirot, so I get the gist of it. And then you've got, I think, is it Jerry Halliwell again, or is it Baby Spice? I think it's Baby Spice because they do that recurring joke with her eyes, don't they?
Yeah, the joke of it is that,
yeah,
she could get away with it if she was the murderer in an episode of Poirot, is like the gist of it. Yeah.
It's a lot of setup for a throwaway gag, which they use, I think, maybe twice.
Yeah.
They use it with the policeman at the end of the film. And it was like, oh yeah, they did do that earlier. I remember that. Nice one. But other than that, it's sort of, again, I don't know why it's being done.
The other thing about Emma Bunton in this is there seems to have been, I was going to say some miscommunication, but the writer of the script is Kim Fuller, who was the brother of Simon Fuller, the Spice Girls manager. So, presumably he was hired because he knows this stuff inside out. I was going to say, if this was a jobbing comedy screenwriter, my assumption would be that there had been some sort of miscommunication and the writer thought that Baby Spice was literally a baby.
Yeah, some of that stuff was really weird. It was just sort of a bad taste on the mouth. But
because she's talking about, like, her part of the bus, she sits on a swing and she has a collection of teddy bears. And I realise this is like a PG certificate movie and its audience is largely female, but you can't get away from the fact that the Spice Girls were being marketed as sex symbols around this time. And you look at this stuff and you think, who is this for? Because I don't like it.
I think someone's heard their nicknames in a writer's room and thought, right, Posh Spice wears only really posh dresses. Sporty Spice has a bicycle. Baby Spice, well, it's her baby. and they've not looked any further than that. And I think
Yeah.
that's the issue where it's sort of. I don't even remember what Mel B does in this film. I
She
don't remember
was,
her sort of.
yeah. She
She's just
takes
there.
a bit of a backseat, I guess, because when you were making a sort of PG certificate buddy movie, there's a very limited number of ways that you can work scariness into it.
I suppose, yeah. They do that. Oh, they do that really weird montage photo shoot with Dominic West.
With Dominic West, yeah.
Dominic
God,
West.
who'd have
Dominic
thought
West.
that Lily James moped thing would be the second most embarrassing photo shoot he was involved in?
I remember because he gets like one line where it's like, "Do the pose." That's
Yeah.
it. That's his only line. And he probably comes out of this film best, to be honest.
Yeah. Yes.
Elvis Costello has more lines than him.
It's funny because after I watched this, I found someone has uploaded to YouTube a collection of outtakes from a Polaroid commercial that the Spice Girls did when they were
Oh,
like signing up for everything. And there is a bit in that where I can't work out the concept of the advert, but it seems to be like a Centrinians takeoff. So
right.
again, it's of that kind of dodgy
Yeah, it's
area. Yeah. But anyway, there is a bit where one of the photographer's assistants suggests that they like hitch their shirts up a bit and show a bit more midriff and undo their top buttons. And Mel B and Jerry in particular just chew them out for it. And it was fascinating comparing that to what I just watched, because I thought in many ways this is the version of Spice World that I would like to watch. What happens when you get 5 pretty ordinary girls, make them the biggest stars in the world, and have them marketed in this way that is sometimes pretty uncomfortable?
yeah. I think again, it's one of those sort of the concept is there. They've assembled all the pieces for it, and then they just don't follow through. They don't manage to bring it all together. They don't manage to, and I suppose it's again we have to understand the audience for this sort of film, where it's going to be, me and you aren't going to go and watch this film at the theater if it's ran. It's
Yeah.
more, a kids' film, or it's predominantly the fans of the Spice Girls themselves are going to go and watch a film about the Spice Girls.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's like you said, where that's sort of the sex appeal is exploited to sell tickets.
Mm.
And I think it's done in parts here. It's not done a lot, which is commendable. But again, it's to get people in the seats. And it's sort of, it does leave a sour taste in the mouth. It's, I don't know, it's something doesn't sit right with the way they've gone about doing it. Even
Yeah.
though the way they do it is limited compared to what we see in sort of modern filmmaking.
Yeah, and I suppose there's also, you have to look at it within the context of how feminism and sexuality was represented in pop music at the time, where
Yeah.
when the Spice Girls first appeared, I was like just old enough to start reading NME, so of course I was very snobby about them because them were the days. But it's also part of that snobbery was fed by the fact that there were like interesting feminist bands around in the 90s. I'm a huge fan of La Tigra, for example. I think Kathleen Hanna's amazing. And when the Spice Girls came out, their attitude was, oh, this is really fucking cynical. This is just like a bunch of pretty girls in crop tops who are saying girl power, and we're meant to accept this as a step forward in feminism rather than a really cynical, sexualized exploitation vehicle. And looking back, I sort of think, yeah, but as great as La Tigra were, they never got on kids' TV shows, did they? And I think that's kind of the purpose of it, for like a 5-year-old girl to be watching Saturday morning TV and see 5 women who support each other and are strong and talk about how girls are powerful. I mean, yeah, if you're spending all your day listening to Riot Girl bands, it's not your thing, but it's not for you, like you said.
I think it's the Spice Girls had that sort of squeaky clean public image that the Beatles originally had, and I think the more I've thought about it when you mentioned Beatlemania, the more musically very different, but image-wise and the impact that they had, it's extremely similar. Where
Yeah.
they were very marketable as not just a band, but as people, because
Mm.
people were interested in what they were doing and how they acted and how they would respond to things. That's why Spice Girls sort of got their own movie. They were on kids' TV. They were all over the place because they had a marketability that nobody else did. You know, Damon
Yeah.
Albarn's not going to be on Cheery Morning kids' cartoon shows doing
No.
things like this. He's
All right,
not the
kids,
right man
make
for the
some
job.
noise. It's Beetlebum.
Oh, I mean, it's like if you contrast sort of Spice Girls doing Cheery Morning kids' TV on a Saturday
Mm.
with, you know, there was that Jarvis Cocker appearance on the Ali G show where he did
Oh,
an a cappella
yes.
version of Help the Aged,
Yeah.
which was baffling. But it sort of shows that audiences the very clear difference where, you know, Ali G versus kids' cartoons. Who's going to be watching kids' cartoons? Children and their, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
very tired parents. Who's going to be watching Ali G? The more edgy indie band
Yeah.
fans. So it, obviously they've got the backing of a majority of people who like not only the music but the people themselves.
Mm.
So, you know, no wonder the film did, you know, pretty well at the box office.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing is, I mean, when one of the things that I was blinded to when the Spice Girls did come out, when they, you know, got a very negative reception from bands I loved, and you know, sometimes deservedly. I was a big fan of Kinnicky back in the '90s, and I appreciated Lauren Laverne and her friends for just barracking the Spice Girls for saying that Margaret Thatcher had girl power.
Oh,
Their whole attitude is like, no, we're from Sunderland, we will not have that.
yeah.
So fair enough. But when Wannabe first came out and you had that video with, you know, them running around this, I guess it was kind of like I don't know what that set was meant to represent, actually, a house of colours. But there was this automatic assumption that, oh, this band's for like boys to lech over, because we'd seen Take That, we'd seen boy bands
Yes,
like
yeah.
that, and they had a young girl fan base, so it made sense that the girl band must be for boys. And in fact, part of their legacy, see how I bring this back round, by
I
the
was
way,
going to
see how
say you've brought it back to the beginning. That's
yeah,
clever.
part of their legacy, part of the thing that I notice now is that everyone who talks about the Spice Girls having an impact on their life is female. That whole
Yeah.
idea that I just internalized that, oh, this band must be for boys because, you know, they're pretty and, you know, they wear crop tops, was just not the truth at all. This band had a seismic impact on young women, and I don't think it's unrealistic to say that part of the reason why you have so many interesting young female pop stars who've decided their own career in this country now might be
Yeah.
because they watched Spice Girls videos when they were growing up.
I think the Spice Girls, if we move away from the movie, I think as artists, it's light. It's sort of, you know, if you go into a club or a pub, it'll be on in the background. It's that sort of accepted notion that the Spice Girls, you know, they didn't make great works of art. They didn't make deep songs. They made, you know, pop tracks. They made
Mm.
really good pop tracks, if I'm honest. You know, Wannabe is still a very good song. And the Spice World album, again, quite good. But I think to understand that the Spice Girls are just sort of more than their music. The music might be simple, but the people behind it were, you know, while they might look factory made, they've inspired a lot of people and they've done a lot of good.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I'm actually thinking about modern pop stars and the Spice Girls. I have to share my favourite fact that I came up with when researching this, even more so than the Gary Oldman one. Which is that Billie Eilish saw this movie as a kid, but assumed that this was a fake band made for the purposes of a comedy movie, until 2017.
Wow. It's, you know what? I can understand that if you had no knowledge of British music and thought, oh, look at that, that's a bit weird. I mean, to an
Can't be
outsider,
real. Yeah,
it's going to be a niche reference for outsiders, but it might just be like looking at the Rootles, with Eric
yeah,
Idle in there. So
yeah,
it smacks of that sort of. Like I said earlier, there is a wholehearted nature to this film where it's these people set out to make an honest shot at making a comedy film and a
mm,
musical, not just to promote their new album, but because they thought it was a good idea to make a movie.
mm,
At the same time, there's this sort of amalgamation of trying to make fun of the genre that they're debuting in
yeah,
and also setting themselves up for a lot of the pratfalls that sort of damages their real world personas. You've got they're literally playing up the stereotypes that on a bus where their rooms are themed to their one name, but
yeah.
in the reality of it all, they were very consistent musicians who put together some good songs, inspired a lot of people, and I don't think that gets across in the movie.
Yeah, because around this time, I mean, this is about 5 months before Jerry Halliwell left the band, which was a real kind of. It's one of those mad things where you look back on it and the news at 10's kicking off with Jerry Halliwell has left the Spice Girls. You think, sorry, were there no wars going on that day or something? Um, but that points to why this should have worked, because back in the late 90s, the Spice Girls was the soap opera that everyone was following. They
Yeah,
must have had compelling personalities to engender this kind of obsession within, well, the world, frankly. But the
definitely.
film is just too much of a mess to really get it across.
I think it's a shame as well because I did go into this film thing, and there is potential here for this to be, relatively good.
Mm,
Musicians in the past have made good movies. You've got the Beatles with Hard Day's Night and Yellow Submarine, that sort of, the likeness and stuff. And then you've got, passion projects from people like David Byrne who did True Stories. It's not a hard leap to make from being a musician to an actor, and that's
yeah.
something we're seeing more and more these days. So the Spice Girls are definitely sort of they're primed to do a role or a movie like this. I just don't think the potential is there from a creative standpoint. I don't think it's all that.
Yeah, completely. And I think part of it too is that although I do have a great affection for the 90s, I can't not have an affection for the 90s. It's when I grew up, but it was too flip an era to really concentrate on what was interesting about the Spice Girls, which for me is captured in those Polaroid outtakes. If the Spice Girls were around now, the whole movie would be about them upbraiding sexist photographers because people are
Yeah,
more comfortable talking about issues in an upfront and sincere way. But
definitely. Yeah.
in the 90s, it all had to be buried under like about 7 layers of irony until you can't tell whether someone means it anymore.
It was sort of, I mean, that Britpop movement and the end of that, where it inspired bands like Coldplay and Radiohead, we were seeing something similar in film. There's
Yeah.
this whole weird branch of films like Notting Hill or The Full Monty that
Mm.
they're two very different films, but they have that sort of same feeling to them of very British, very, you've got Hugh Grant in one, you've got Robert Carlyle in the other, but I don't think he's British, is he?
Oh no, he is British. Yeah.
Brilliant, there we go.
Yeah.
It works, that's all right. But yeah, you've got The Full Monty with Robert Carlyle, you've got Notting Hill with Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant was the poster boy for British filmmaking. He did Four Weddings and a Funeral and then just skyrocketed from there.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like the Spice Girls saw this and thought, we're relatively popular. We could do that. And to be fair, I do believe that they could do that in
Mm.
this period of time. I do think they had the potential to not take it and run, not like the Beatles did, but I do think they had what it took to make an acceptable pop comedy musical.
Mm.
But it's not quite there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is more fascinating as a sort of artifact of a time than it
Yeah.
is for a movie. And speaking of artifacts of the time, this is the question that everyone had to have a pre-prepared answer for in the late 90s. And now I think enough water's passed under the bridge that I can disinter it from its grave. I'm sure you'll have thought deeply about it. Ewan, who's your favourite Spice Girl?
Oh no. Oh, see, this is one of those questions where whatever you answer, you're wrong. You're going to annoy 4/5 of the population that know of the Spice Girls.
It's like a Rorschach test, you know. It just reveals something about you, whether you want it to or not.
Right. I'm going to analyze this properly, and we'll break it down. It can't be Ginger Spice because she left the band very soon after this film. Quitter.
Yeah.
No respect for quitters.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to say. Mel B, no, because I remember there's a Charlie Brooker Yearly White where he makes fun of her ad campaign, and I can't get that out of my head.
It was like
so
what was that for? It was like a giant Mel B, wasn't it?
And it was her fitness regimen thing, and it was sort of get fit with Mel B, and she was like, get fit now, and then Charlie Brooker just cuts and goes, no, and that's all I remember about Mel B. That's it. Can I say Richard E. Grant's my favourite Spice Girl?
That'll do.
No, I think I'm going to say Mel C. I don't think she gets enough credit for how much she impacted the band, because she was sort of sporty Spice, and she was very, you know.
Yeah.
I think as well, it's sort of the closest one that I can relate to, you know. I mean, I'm not saying I'm sporty, but I'm not scary or posh.
Yeah, you're sportier than you are posh. We'll say that, yeah. Or ginger.
Who would you pick then, if you had to pick one?
See, I can remember this as like sedimentary layers of my adolescence, and when Wannabe came out, I must have been about 12 or 13. So I liked Baby Spice the most because she was utterly unthreatening. It's like Lisa Simpson's non-threatening boys magazine for me. And then as soon as the hormones kicked in, it was Jerry for, again, fairly unelevated reasons. And now I think you have got a point with Mel C, but I kind of think Mel B just gets a rough deal, man. I wanted more of I wanted to see something of the woman who I saw like tearing strips off that Polaroid photographer, despite being dressed in a sort of a frankly fetishized schoolgirl uniform, just marching up to him and reading the riot act. I admire that, and I think she's a survivor. You know, I think she's been through some unpleasant tabloid shit, and I respect that.
Yeah, definitely. But that was the thing as well. You know, they were sort of a cultural phenomenon, and because they ushered in this new wave of music, the tabloids picked up on it, and that was it. Like, just like that, they were so invested in their lives and their personalities. It's very ghoulish, but unfortunately, that's the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how much of the tabloid pressure helped or harmed this movie. Where if the Spice Girls are in the public mind constantly, and then they start seeing posters for the movie crop up, they're going to think, oh, those people from the front page of the Daily Star are in the cinema. I'll go and check that out.
And it's at the start of when that became a thing, wasn't it? Because previously the logic was that if someone is in the newspapers all the time, there must be a movie there. If people read it in the newspapers, they'll watch it in the cinemas. And at some point, that balance tipped. So now, whenever I see a movie that features anyone who is in the public eye or any kind of recent story, whether it's like one of the 1,000 dramatizations of the Trump presidency that we're about to get or anything like that, I just curl up and die inside because I am already so sick of hearing about this. And maybe you're right, maybe Spice World was the point at which that shifted.
Yeah, I think for me, because I mean, I wasn't alive at the time the Spice Girls were popular. Like, I wasn't born until 2 years after this movie released, so I sort of skipped that tabloid stage of the Spice Girls. Like when I was old enough to read newspapers and stuff, It was sort of Elton John was getting a lot of the flack in the papers when I
Yeah.
was reading front pages. So this isn't a new thing. I just think it started getting more prevalent with the Spice Girls by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
It was like you said, where it was Jerry Halliwell's left Spice Girls, get on the 10 o'clock news, that's the lead story.
Yeah, exactly. And it is kind of a shame because I think cinema can and should be something that reflects the society it's in, but it takes a long time to make a film. And when the bones of a story have already been picked clean, you can't do that. But
yeah, I mean, they tried. They had that tabloid character, but again, like most of the subplots, it doesn't go anywhere, and it just sort of fizzles out, really.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to see that they tried to do it.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, I think that's a pretty fair kind of epitaph for the movie, isn't it? It's not good, but you can see that there's people trying in it.
yeah, it by no means is a good movie, and it's not something I'd want to return to. But it's admirable that they tried, and I do think there's honest intentions from everyone involved to try and make a good film rather than a cash in for the album that released.
Yeah, which I learned was recorded when they were actually on set, which basically makes that second Spice Girls album the Spice Girls equivalent of New Adventures in Hi-Fi by REM. It's
That's amazing.
Yes.
So they did a movie and an album more or less at the same time, whilst dealing with tabloid pressure, and I assume touring the album.
Yeah.
It's a genuine feat of endurance to do so much in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, and I like say when you go back, there was all that speculation about why Jerry left, and did she clash with such and such a person? Was there interband rivalries? Was it because of someone they were dating? And when they talk about it now, they are pretty upfront about the fact that no, we were just exhausted. We just couldn't do it anymore. And you think, yeah, sometimes the less mythic explanation carries a certain truth, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's again, to compare them to the Beatles, the controversy around the Beatles splitting up and Yoko Ono and John Lennon and Paul McCartney falling out, compared to the Spice Girls just saying, no, we were just quite tired, to be honest.
Yeah.
It sort of fizzles out all that controversy and like you said, the mythical element to that ghoulish sentiment of tabloid, where they're picking apart why it's happened and stuff like that, and then years later it's just, oh, we were a bit tired, we packed it in.
I think that there is a sense that it must be some bigger story because they were such like larger than life personalities and they were the focus of such attention. But in reality, there is going to be a limit to how much you can just pick girls in their early 20s out of obscurity and put them into this insane machine and have them want to do it for a long time. It's just a human thing.
Everyone has their breaking point. I think they did very well to get so far with such pressure in such a flurry.
And every now and then there's like talk of a reunion, and there was one in 2007 which they played some dates but it kind of petered out for one reason or another. But I will say this, that 2007 reunion was announced live on stage by Richard E. Grant. And I just love the idea that Richard E. Grant is just the keeper of the Spice Girls legacy.
He's
now.
Secretly their manager in real life. This acting thing's a front. He's actually the Spice Girls manager for touring.
That's why he was behaving so weird when he got the Oscar nomination. He thought, oh no, this is going to blow my cover.
He was so relieved when he didn't have to get out the chair and stand at the stage and say, it's been a farce. I'm actually the manager of Baby Spice. And that was it. That would have been the end for him.
Yes. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Pop Screen, I think. Do you just want to remind listeners where they can find you normally?
You can find me on Northern Lights, Geek Show, obviously, and Cult Following.
And I am on the Geek Show and Horrified. But until next time, that's your lot from Pop Screen. We'll see you next week.